So last week I made an 8-minute long video on poetry, but I never actually answered the question, what is poetry? Salutations! Welcome to Loving the Language of Literacy. My name is Sophia Lee, and welcome to episode 2 of my journey to the dark side. This question was brought up and thoroughly discussed this week when one of my classmates switched genres for the day with her twin sister. She was wondering what it is that makes poetry, what makes a poem in general, because the definition is really elusive. So today I'm here to answer the question. We went around the circle talking about our own experience with poetry, what poetry has done for us, and what we think makes up a poem. So I, of course, the nerd I am who wanted to make a YouTube video, wrote down everyone's answers, and I'm gonna tell you what I learned from them because they are so much more eloquent than what I actually said at the table. Because I ended up just mumbling something about fiction and poetry and my methods and just I don't even know what I said. Anyways, poetry is all about providing the reader with a new perspective and being thought-provoking. It's an extremely malleable genre, and what my teacher Georgia said is that you can basically do anything you want with it as long as you can get away with it. And basically what that means is that almost anything can be a poem, and as long as you have good enough writing, people will accept it as a poem and they will hopefully like it. Of course, when it comes to poetry, there is always the E word, and when I'm talking about the E word, I obviously mean emotion. Emotion is basically what all the people who don't write poetry think that poetry is 100% about. And yes, a large amount of poetry is about emotion expression. And sometimes when you're writing a narrative, maybe the emotion behind it or the emotion that fuels the characters is a bit tossed aside for the story, plot, character development. But when you're writing a poem, it really goes to the core, and emotion is the focus, or at least what drives it. And what was really interesting that I heard from one of my classmates was that she said that it is like a time capsule, and I completely agree with her. But side note, I'm a photographer and I love taking pictures because obviously you will never have the same type of day. And photos provide such time capsules for memories and the overall experience of your life. And I think that's true with poetry because, of course, when you're writing a narrative, you may not always remember that the day I wrote this action scene with this character was the day that my dog died. But maybe if you write a poem about it, or even something infused with your emotions of the day, it will definitely serve you well. Also, what I want to bring up is that if you're writing a poem, you can still write as a character, which may be helpful for those of you who are fiction writers who are a bit tentative about moving over or trying out the genre. Writing as a character helps in one of two ways, and the first is that writing as a character helps you still retain emotional connection because maybe you're writing as if you are the character and you've experienced what they have. And on the other hand, it can help you a lot with distancing yourself from reality and serves as an escape because whatever character you're writing about is kind of a vehicle or a vessel for what you're going through, and just will send away all your thoughts and emotions of the right now, and you can dive into their world that they're feeling in the poem they're writing. And it can still obviously be 100% you without being fiction. Also, on occasion, when you're writing poetry, you can make things larger than life and get away with it because you can make it the broadest idea or concept possible, or zero in on the very thread of your story of what you're trying to say, which I find extremely beneficial as a poet. It also helps with, of course, the E word of emotion when you're trying to vent whatever feelings you have of anger or frustration or whatever you're going through, which is also why it's known that angsty teenagers write poetry. We have a lot of changes we're going through and we need some way to get it on paper without killing someone. I definitely would agree with that, but I would also say that you can't discount poetry just because a lot of it has to do with the insane emotions and times of change as a teenager. Also, you've got to think about the quantity of words, and that is my biggest problem as a poet because I am so much a fiction writer in terms of the style and the amount of words I use. But what my teacher said was that think of it as if you are painting a picture in words rather than using words to paint a picture, which is what you'd want to do in fiction. And I thought this was just so insightful, and I will definitely keep that in mind when I write my own poetry. Lastly, there is enjambment, which is when you're going through and revising your poem. This is an idea I was just introduced to last Saturday, and I absolutely absolutely love it. Everyone in the poetry class who has been there before has absolutely been infused and obsessed with it because you just, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And for those of you who have no idea what enjambment was, and trust me, I was in your exact same boat, it is when you work and play around with the line breaks in your poem, because what you might say ends up being something totally different if you spin it a different way. So the famous example that my teacher got was when she was going through a class with a 6th grade boy who had just experienced his first breakup with his first ever girlfriend, and he was completely distraught and just broken because of it. And what he wrote at first, and she thought that something might be going along differently in his poem, was, "I feel like you want me." And that was the first line. And then the next part, which was still the same sentence, was "to die," which was, in my opinion, just the biggest plot twist ever. So that's basically what enjambment is. You think that you're going with some kind of tangent, you're following some sort of thread, but it ends up being something totally different, and that's what one of my classmates described it was, as just a plot twist or something different that just pops out at you that would not have shown up had you broken it up differently, but it's still the exact same words in the exact same sentence. Lastly, for those of you who are still kind of confused about poetry and reluctant to maybe try out poetry yourself, all you need to think about is that you don't think. My English teacher says that poetry is just an improvement upon the blank page. So no matter how cliche you think it is, no matter how crappy it is, you just need to write and to get it out. There will be so much time for revisions to go over it later. Something Georgia brought up this week, which I thought was a brilliant way to think about it when you're revising, is that whatever words that are there that you may think are bad or terrible or just make no sense, they are markers for better opportunities, which is such a better, more positive way to think about what you may have thought was absolute crap, and I have got to use the strategy when I'm revising my own poetry. And that is the end of this section of the video. If you wanted the answer to what is poetry, then there's that. One of the girls in my class brought in the prompt for the day, and that was to write a letter in the voice of some object in the room. And then these objects were everything from Kleenexes to a cup of coffee to an inhaler, earbuds, Sharpie, a crystal, just whatever was in the room. Everyone in my class drew these connections, and for some of them these romantic ballads to these just quirky and snarky remarks to each other through the voices of these objects. I absolutely loved it. Personification, especially in poem form, is just the best, and I loved the prompt. I will actually today be sharing with you what I wrote. It's definitely not classical poetry in terms of what you think of as a poem. Everyone in my class called it prosatry, which is prose and poetry, because that's where I was going that day when I was writing it. So I'm just gonna read it because I think it was fun. Just a little proem that I wrote, and this is from the orange Sharpie to the dry erase marker. Dear orange Sharpie, what is the meaning of life? I bet you have never asked yourself this question because, well, you're a Sharpie. In the realm of writing instruments, you are so obviously the king because you do only what I have longed for all my life. You are permanent. Day after day, week after week, I muse on that relentlessly whiteboard, serving my purpose as the instruction writer or the doodler. Don't get me wrong, I love my job. Getting people to where they're supposed to go is my life's pleasure. But no matter what I write, no matter how helpful I am, my work always disappears. For once, could eraser let my markings stay? For once, could people step back and appreciate everything I've written without erasing it 2 seconds later? Why work constantly if only to be abandoned at the end of the day? What is the meaning of my existence if I'm only to have a temporary mark on the world? All I ask is to be recognized as something more than disposable. Sincerely your friend, the bitter purple dry erase marker. That was fun, kind of a little more theatrical side. I feel like I should be going back to playwriting with that kind of poem. But that was just what I wrote, and I promised that I would share things. Then we transitioned into the 2 poems that Georgia brought in for the day, and she always brings them in to just discuss different tools that were used, different styles and formats and tones. And the 2 poems we discussed in class were We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks as well as Poem for Haruku by June Jordan. We Real Cool is such a fascinating poem because it is only 26 36 words, which is basically the definition of conservation of language. As readers, we get such an in-depth, detailed story, and we can have so many inferences about the characters and their lives and what they're going through. And there are only 2 to 3 words for each of the characters at the Golden Shovel. Poem for Haruko is a book that Georgia chose basically for just 1 word. The entire poem itself is an excellent example for enjambment, but the word that just takes the cake is tergiversations. And I had never heard this word before, and I love it, and I haven't succeeded, but I really want to try to just weave it into some sort of essay or writing piece for school because it's an awesome word. And this is a poem that doesn't really lay things on the table, but more leaves them up to interpretation about a man who we believe lost his true love. Tell me in the comments below if there are any poems or any poets that you think I should read and check out, because I am dying to have recommendations. What does poetry mean to you personally? Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Keep calm, read on, and I'll see you in a video soon. Goodbye!